Hi everyone, lovely to see you. I'm just going to go over to another page. I can't see myself anymore. I hope you can still see me, sort of. Um, I'm coming to you today to try and share a little bit of Alison McDowell's work because I found myself writing notes while I was listening to her latest video on steering consciousness, linguistic alchemy, and soul cybernetics. And while I couldn't possibly do the topic and what she had to say about it, the justice that it deserves, I am taking the gamble that she won't mind my cannibalized regurgitation of her research, because she's always urging people to catch up, and I don't think that she would object to a little bit of group work. That being said, I have jumped on immediately after writing this, because if I don't do it straight away, I will find too much fault with it to go ahead. By the next time that I have a free window, I will have had time to think about the breathtaking stupidity of doing an Alison McDowell 101. My idea is to take you through the first hour and 15 minutes of the video in a sort of more condensed time, which will give you a foundation for watching the playlist, which is in the comment section. I want to take a moment here to credit Cindy Niles. It's only because Cindy shared a link to these clips that I was inspired to make the effort to watch and learn. We're all links in a chain. Alison, Cindy, myself, and you. You're the next link, and hopefully I can inspire you the way that Cindy has inspired me, or you can just share the information despite me. As a quick prefix, my interpretation of the information that I am being presented with is that we have to start getting people to understand that subjugation has always existed. Throughout history, there have been monarchies and dictators in abundance, and it would be foolhardy to think that we live in a time where there wasn't a ruling class. I'm sure that I'm going to stand corrected, but I would hazard a guess that the one that we're currently dealing with began to coalesce in about the 1800s and evolved from a blend of monarchical families and billionaire dynasties. And just like in 1066, when William the Conqueror came over from France to England because he thought that he was the legitimate successor to the British crown, and ordinary men died in abundance at the Battle of Hastings, fighting over which rich guy was going to rule over them, we are similarly manipulated by our own quasi-aristocracy, who also do things to achieve their own ends, with no care for human casualty, because they have been brought up from birth to think that we are different, in a way that makes us expendable pawns on a global chessboard. Just because the middle classes have relatively big houses, nice cars, and send their children to good schools, doesn't mean that they aren't peasants in the eyes of the overlords. We have so many creature comforts that we tend to forget that our lives are dictated to by the whims of the very wealthy, who we also seem to forget have to suffer from a certain amount of psychopathy simply to hoard the wealth that they do. If you can go to bed every night and satisfy yourself that it's okay to have multiple billions in the bank because you're giving money to charity as a tax dodge, while there are literally children dying every day for want of food, there has to be something wrong with you. And there's something wrong with our society as a whole that it celebrates these people as philanthropists. Anyway, history teaches us that whenever a ruling class's obsession with affluence and control gets beyond the communal capacity of the ordinary person to withstand it, there is a revolt and they are overturned. And we're now at that juncture ourselves. But the problem is that the contemporary ruling class has access to far superior weaponry than ever before. They have been using and continue to use military-grade mind manipulation technology against us. And they've had a huge head start because they've been withholding and distorting our learning through the public education system for almost a century. They are also in cahoots with each other across the globe because it's now so easy for them to communicate online and by personal jet. If you've never seen Monopoly, Who Owns the World, then you really must watch the documentary. In it, the presenter, shares an image of a pyramid which clearly illustrates that every brand that you are familiar with, excepting small family enterprise, even brands which appear to be competing like Pepsi and Coca-Cola. All of these brands are ultimately owned by the same people. The pyramid illustrates how a spider web of investment capital firms all trace back to the same two companies, BlackRock and Vanguard. The people behind these firms are today's aristocracy or ruling class, and they don't just have all the money, but by virtue of always being in control of the terms on which ordinary people access money, whether that's through earnings, bank loans, or charitable funding, they get to decide how our world evolves. So, for example, if you're applying for funding for your charity and the only pot that you're eligible for stipulates that you, for instance, must publicly support LGBT rights, then you're going to jump through that hoop in order to satisfy the criteria. Now, this is the bit where I attempt to build on my shaky foundation and introduce you to what I have garnered from listening to Alison this afternoon, whose initial and primary concern is that the resistance doesn't understand the enormity or the nature of the beast that it is fighting, a concern which she encapsulated in a statement to the effect that the ordinary resistance is failing to comprehend that the digital sovereignty system is cover for complex adaptive systems towards emergence which deliver the illusion of agency but are entirely controlled. So I think you will all understand that there is ample scope for me to be wrong in my interpretations. But even if I'm just offering myself up as a sacrificial, mediocre intellect so that the resistance can argue about how wrong I am in the context of technological tyranny, then I may be said to have achieved something despite myself, which is an avenue I have become very familiar with. So what does she mean by this? Well, she makes a comment about the future being more Brave New World than 1984. And a very brief synopsis of the novel, which was written by Aldous Huxley and published in 1932 by Britannica.com, says, "The novel examines a futuristic society called the World State that revolves around science and efficiency. In this society, emotions and individuality are conditioned out of children at a young age, and there are no lasting relationships because everyone belongs to everyone else." So, for science and efficiency, think technocracy, a world dictated to by algorithms, with the added contemporary development of artificial intelligence thrown in. She then underlines the point about destabilizing relationships for the purposes of the acquisition of wealth and the maintenance of control, which is already being achieved but will become a far more significant problem when artificial intelligence starts making all the decisions. I tend to think of law here because I have read a few articles about replacing lawyers with AI, and what I have retained is that they perceive that this is a domain where the introduction of decision-making artificial intelligence will be a comparatively easy transition because law can be construed as being black and white, with decisions being made on the grounds of legislation and precedents alone. We've actually been duped in this regard in both the UK and America, in the sense that legislation isn't law and the final word actually lies with the jury, who are at liberty to ignore the legislation if they think for any reason that it is an inappropriate or inaccurate measure of events. However, having lost sight of this fact somewhere in the last century, because it was deliberately obscured by the elite such that the children didn't learn about it in schools and jurors were misled through omission of fact, we tend to think of law and justice as being a forum where clear-cut outcomes are delivered upon established principles. But really, the less empathic and more rigorous our judicial systems become, the more damage that will be done to society. The law was never intended to be exclusively black and white because every human being and every situation is unique, and without a little bit of leeway, dealing with judicial disputes will become terrifying. The AI will decide whether your teenager should go to prison for shoplifting, not taking into account that their dad died a year ago and you have had to work overtime all year to pay the bills. the AI will decide what contact you get with your children if you go through a divorce. And I don't think I even need to elaborate on that example further for people to understand how important it is not to let it happen. And let's not forget about all of the jobs that will be lost in the process. If this lack of humanity prevails, even more individuals and relationships will suffer from the fallout, which will exacerbate isolation and make people more vulnerable to tyrannical control. At this point, Alison gives a more personal example, which is really sad. She explains how a dating app has aided the dissolution of her marriage. And we all know the damage that technology has done to so many relationships through the promotion and proliferation of pornography and the normalization of paying for sexual services online. So it comes as no surprise that the more advanced the technology, the less secure the traditional relationships. She also touches on a story that was written in 2018 and published on the MIT website, which imagines a scenario where a marriage breaks down because the AI, amongst other things, thinks that her husband would perform better if there was some sexual chemistry in his work domain, and thereby it facilitates this, presumably by working out his preferences from all the available data and promoting or newly employing a colleague who ticks all his boxes. And this intentional tinkering leads to divorce. Having made the point about relationship breakdowns, she moves on to reference a book by Neil Stephenson called Snow Crash, which is apparently ostensibly about a mind virus that attacks software developers, but also underlines how esoteric knowledge, which means knowledge intended for or only likely to be understood by a small or specialist group of people, spellcasting, by which I'm not sure if she's referencing the occult or she means taking advantage of the power of language to influence people, like propaganda on steroids. And she also mentions neuroscientific expertise and how these three things together can be used and are used to influence human behavior. By way of underlining this point, she then mentions the Broca area of the brain, which is apparently the script writing function, where we make the link between our thoughts and the words that come out of our mouth. And it doesn't take much imagination to perceive the damage and control that could be harnessed by influencing this part of the brain through either psychology or nanotechnology. And I think the accessory point here is that the end game is to have what people call a hive mind or ant colony outcome, where everyone functions as a discrete but interchangeable chunk of a preconceived immutable structure. In her words, this would ultimately establish a global brain nervous system. Imagine how impressive it would be to be the first government to get all of your peasant class under control. Trudeau? Next up is Homo Directus, the steerable man, and the name Patrick Ryan. I have to be honest, I didn't pick up on whether this title was a book and this man was the author, and I haven't been able to clarify things by searching online. There's a fantasy writer called Patrick Ryan, and she references a lot of futuristic fantasy, so perhaps she's talking about him. But that being said, he doesn't appear to have written a book with this title. Anyway, it doesn't matter. The point that she makes here is that people need to get beyond the black and white thinking and commit themselves to understanding the multitude of nuanced weaponry that is going to be used against us. So rather than, thinking, well, no, actually I won't give an example because I can't remember it. On to Michael Endy, All About Time, Stigmergy, Collective Grammar Fields. Which I think is about understanding that it benefits technocratic control if we all have a similar mindset or on like-for-like neural pathways, so that we can effectively operate as an individual, nanotechnologically driven part of a collective robotic swarm. I think I pulled that off. By means of elaboration, she talks about the development of artificial pheromones. And just in case you, like I, was not entirely clear on what pheromones were, the definition, according to Merriam-Webster, is that they are a secreted or excreted chemical factor that triggers a social response in members of the same species, which is quite frightening. Here she talks about Febreze and the plug-in scent-making thingies, and the fact that these companies are all owned by the same group of people who are more than likely using every weapon in their arsenal to get humanity under control. This is the work of social physicists who are heavily implicated in behavioral economics, aka social engineering. And now for the last point, you'll be happy to hear, which is about her concern that the resistance is framing the problem in terms of your government's going to kill you, or the elite are trying to effect tyrannical control. When the brutally sad and ironic truth, if irony is what I think it is, which it probably isn't, but anyway, the sad truth is that it is our friends, families, and communities that are going to subjugate us. We will destroy each other through online rating systems, which are like a complex web of social credit scores, where you can change the variables, and as a result, someone's reputation capital goes up or down. Think of all the feedback for customer service that you're already asked to provide online. Imagine a personalized TripAdvisor-style rating app for your performance at work, your performance as a global citizen, your performance as a friend, your performance in bed? Maybe. She plays a clip which illustrates this military mindfuckery, her words, featuring a group of people discussing a software program called SourceCred and hyping the positive functionality of being able to use it within a community to find like-minded people by changing the variables in the algorithm, which in reality serves as a chilling reminder that once you are operating inside a game, the rules can be changed to your disadvantage. And there's nothing that you can do about it, because all of your information, going back to your very first internet search, has been saved as an immutable part of a blockchain, which can never be altered. And on that uplifting note, I come to the part where I ask you to follow Cindy's directions and watch the playlist of edited clips that Alison has put together using the videos she references in this 4-hour talk. And hopefully these videos won't make any less sense to you now that you've listened to me. In summary, I'd just like to say that when we regard the scale of the problem through these eyes, the only thing that makes any sense to me as a solution is the removal of the infrastructure. As long as the infrastructure is in place, they will use it to their best advantage. What this amounts to, I don't know, but tracking down who owns the LED street lighting in your area and having a good conversation with them might be a good place to start. Thank you all so much for listening to me. I hope that was okay. I was on another screen, so I couldn't see. I'm just going to pop down and see if anybody said anything like, "We can't hear you," or "Stop talking." No, nobody said anything of that nature, so that's good. Hopefully you could hear me, and thank you so much for listening. I love you. Bye.